Billionaires are against big government unless taxpayer money is flowing up to them rather than down to us. When it benefits the wealthy, it all suddenly makes sense.
We're living through the most corrupt presidential administration in American history, a $300 million ballroom, a $230 million payout from the Department of Justice because the president got his feelings hurt because he had to be investigated for being a criminal. Hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars spent at Trump-owned properties around the country, Trump-branded wine being sold at the Coast Guard exchanges, American taxpayer dollars being spent on DHS propaganda ads on Truth Social, awarding federal contracts to corporations in exchange for campaign contributions. Kash Patel flew his girlfriend around the country on a multi-million-dollar jet that taxpayers paid for. Kristi Noem gave companies she's affiliated with hundreds of millions of tax dollars, then went out and spent another $200 million on 2 private jets for her travel. For 12 months, this administration has been taking billions of taxpayer dollars from American people and have been giving it away to their own companies in the form of tax cuts, government contracts, or other government-funded subsidies. So Congress has a role in getting rid of fraud, I will admit that, in any federally funded government program. However, I think the fraud that the American people are concerned about is that the Republicans are taking away Americans' health care so that ultra-billionaires can get more tax cuts. The real fraud is the dehumanization and demonization of the working class Americans and immigrants to distract folks away from corporate socialism that's happening because of the Republicans. So this is truly the definition of throwing away the baby with the bathwater. The Republican philosophy is that if the cost of living for the average American increases, they're on their own. But if the cost of doing business increases for the wealthiest people on earth, well, then it's the government job to bail them out.
Maybe the government's already sometimes doing a form of socialism, but for wealthy interests. And should we just be more real about that?
Lena, this is it. Now we've got the rubber meets the road because the corporations are people, but they are people that use public resources. They benefit from our water, from our energy, from our stability, from our labor. And yet those things are not compensated for. And taxing them is then seen as their get out of jail free card. If you tax us, we will flee. But we don't ever have to acknowledge the amount of benefit that we get from the public infrastructure that has been built by tax dollars that is not ours, that is the people's, not the corporations. And when you start from that premise, doesn't this whole thing look a little bit different?
I think so. And you know what was so interesting was even the ways that we do government shutdowns. What areas of service get shut down and what areas of service are still provided is really interesting. And just to give you a small example, at the Federal Trade Commission, when the government shut down, they shut down the basic hotlines where people could report fraud, where people could report identity theft. What stayed open was the place that Wall Street could report their mergers and keep those mergers still going.
Priorities, Lena.
And it was really interesting. I mean, just a few days ago, before we saw the deal in the Senate, I saw reported in the Wall Street Journal that the FAA had started telling people that their private jets might not be able to land as easily at some of the busiest airports. And it was a really interesting question, like, should private jets have been stopped on day one of the shutdown, maybe? You know?
They're exempted. They're the essential workers.
So the entire U.S. economy growth can be tracked down to 7 companies and their AI growth specifically. At least 40% of economic growth this year is attributed to these companies alone, and 80% of stock gains this year came from AI companies. But people are justifying these levels of investment because of the promises that the CEOs make that there will be a return on that investment. So for a company like OpenAI, their value is based on the expectation that they're going to figure out how to make a profit out of it. And they haven't. And so generating this increased human dependency that can be mined because it's not subject to HIPAA. Is that correct, Dr. King?
Right, it's not subject to HIPAA.
It's not subject to HIPAA. So people's deepest fears, secrets, emotional content, relationships can all be mined for this empty promise that we're getting from these companies to turn a profit. And the reason I bring all of this up is because the exposure of this industry and this investment, I fear, has reached broad levels, potentially, of the American economy. When we're talking about 40% of stock growth in the United States being attributed to these companies in the AI sector alone, and that sector has not turned a profit, we're talking about a massive economic bubble. And we've seen, depending on the exposure of that bubble, we could see 2008-style threats to economic stability. And that pressure is reflected on the extreme lengths that these companies are going to allow unethical human interactions with these chatbots. I say this because I want to say also on the record that should this bubble pop, and I say this for my colleagues here, should this bubble pop, my colleague from Massachusetts mentioned the level of AI lobbying that occurs here in Congress. Should this bubble pop, we should not be entertaining a bailout. We should not entertain a bailout of these corporations as healthcare is being denied to everyday Americans, as SNAP and food assistance is being denied to everyday Americans, precipitating some of the very mental crises that people are turning to AI chatbots to try to resolve.
CNBC reported that some business leaders in this great city are, quote, looking for therapy and therapists because of one particular woman on your team, transition co-chair, former Federal Trade Commission chair, Lina Khan, who they fear, they hate in many cases. What is the symbolism of her appointment? What message are you sending to business leaders?
Well, I think the message we're sending to everyone is that at a time when Donald Trump is looking to use the law as a weapon to punish working class people, here is someone who has showcased the ability for the law to be something that protects those same people. And I have long been inspired by Lina Khan's protection of people across this country in the face of corporate greed and the willingness to actually use the tools of government to take action. Because for so long, what we've been told are the only options in front of us are to support something or to issue a strongly worded letter in opposition to that thing. And what she has shown is, in fact, you can use these tools to deliver.
The U.S. government would become the largest shareholder of Intel. This is actual socialism happening by a Republican administration. This is a horrible precedent. This is socialism. All of you people were freaked out about Mamdani in New York City wanting government-run grocery stores and saying the people need to seize the means of production. That's what Harold Lutnick is doing right now, saying that the government must seize a controlling interest in Intel, the means of production, in order to get government money. You can't just be against socialism when the left does it.
Back in November, a U.S. judge backed a bid by an American hedge fund to purchase Citgo Petroleum. The Treasury still has to approve that deal. The hedge fund is actually run by a big Trump donor, Paul Singer. Do you want to preserve Venezuelan ownership of Citgo? Do you want to have America have a financial stake in it? Like Trump bought big portion of an Intel company. Do you want to own portions of oil companies?
Again, that's going to be up to American businesses. That's certainly a very real possibility. The Citgo sale is part of bringing redress to creditors of the United States for the Venezuelan government. And of course, one of the capital providers in that transaction is a hedge fund provider you just mentioned. Mm-hmm. There's lots of American investors and American refining entrepreneurs that are involved in that. So to take Venezuelan-owned refineries that are in the United States and legally, through an auction process, transfer them to American owners and American entrepreneurs in the refining business, I think that's fantastic.
There's concern about corruption here, though.
American corporations benefit enormously from government intervention in the form of subsidies, tax breaks, bailouts, and even stock buyouts. And yet socialism is still considered a dirty word when discussed in terms of policies that would benefit everyday Americans. Trump is copying every other oligarch's playbook, seizing control of key sectors, then handing the rewards to his friends and family. This was never about small government. Government has never been bigger. Look at the military budget, which for fiscal year 2025 is $832 to $850 billion. And he says he wants that to go up by 50%. He's slashing support for vital services and then consolidating power in industries that benefit insiders. The issue isn't big government versus small government. Government has always been big. The real question is who the government serves. Trump administration is determined to put power and wealth into the hands of the few billionaires, all while terrorizing anybody who refuses to play along.